Well, hi everyone. I am Dave Marcus, and welcome to the latest episode of Lowdown on Low Code by the team at analysis.tech. I have with me today my colleague Rob. Rob, always great to see you, even though we're talking to each other from two very different parts of the world.
Good to see you, Dave.
Brilliant. So today we have for you a really, really good guest that we've been talking to for quite some time and had a relationship with for quite some time. Nick Ford is most recently the CMO of Mendix, and now actually doing a whole bunch of advisory work in his own right. But we'll probably hear a little bit more about that. This is a really good opportunity for us to chat to Nick. He's been fairly recently talking about a number of things on LinkedIn that are very topical and align really well with the analysis.tech messaging and strategy as well. And we'll cover some of those as we go through today. Nick, as always, for those of the people watching who do not know you, maybe you can just spend a little bit of time giving us a slight bit of background, your journey, and then maybe a little anecdote about something that people might not know about you.
Oh, okay, right. Sprung that on me. Yeah. So Nick Ford, I was the CMO for Mendix. I'd been with Mendix for over 15 years. I started when it was a very small company, was taken on by the founders to sort of set up the UK arm of that business, and have been hopefully in some way responsible for it growing into what some would argue it is probably one of the world's most prevalent low-code platforms. But my career in low-code didn't start there. I've been in business for around 40 years. Started off as a COBOL programmer, but very quickly got involved in working with some of the very early um, abstraction automation of software technologies, the fourth generation languages of this world, rapid application development environments of the sort of early 2000 code generation, and then more latterly Mendix. So I've spent most of my career in the sort of pursuit of abstraction automation of software and software engineering, with a little bit of time sort of in other roles. Business development manager. I was head of the UK division for Mendix for a while, but predominantly in that space. So it's been an interesting time. I had a fabulous time at Mendix, but I've decided to move on and sort of plow my own furrow for a short while after leaving that company. So I'm excited to be here. I think, one of probably your first guests on the podcast when you kicked off
Absolutely.
some time ago. So, but yeah, nice to be back. So thanks for inviting me in.
Very
Great.
good. So great to have you. Rob, over to you.
Hey, so yeah, thanks for coming back, Nick. You were one of the first. You were one of the first handfuls of guests. It's great to have you back in a different capacity because love the work that you did at Mendex, but all of us, any of us who've moved from a kind of a vendor into a more thought leadership analyst role know that frees you to do some different types of thinking. And among the things you've been doing that we've been following on social media and has been getting huge reception is your six truths. And I'd
Yeah.
love it if you could bring it through and give our audience a little insight into your thinking there.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those kind of things that is things I've sort of observed over the many years. I think what's interesting about the six truths is there's nothing new in there, right? And I think in today's day and age, that's quite a good thing. We wake up every day to something new technology, a new acronym, a new way of doing things. And I sort of sat down after leaving Menus and thought about what is it that I've learned fundamentally, not through that journey, but through my entire career. And I came up with what was originally eight truths, but some sort of collapsed into others as I went through the process and got feedback from various different people. So, and I've had some good feedback, and it's been great to see the resonance from that. I wouldn't say that the six truths are a framework. I think what I saw over my years was a sort of a failure pattern. Particularly in the low code space, but I think the truths are applicable beyond that. And that failure pattern was mainly driven by, I guess, some of the success of low code. When software development gets easier, more simple, I mean, we talk about the acceleration of building software and building applications. What tends to happen is the unit of measure becomes an app. You can build an app 10x faster than you used to be able to build an app. And so organizations set off with this appetite to build quickly. And that's a noble pursuit. But in reality, I think what I learned is that those that were more successful in their journey were the ones that really thought about what it is they were building. Are we building and celebrating applications? Are we building enduring capability? And so the six truths really sort of lay out a pattern that I saw over many years, where organizations that were hugely successful would take this technology and implement it with a strategic vision. So they'd think about, what is it I'm building? How am I empowering the right people to build better? Am I thinking about reuse? Am I thinking about all of the things that we know compound over time? But it surprised me how often that didn't happen. And the interesting thing for me was that um, if you didn't set out with the right objective, if you didn't set out with the vision for what you wanted out of your local platform, that it would always become a tactical solution to a speed problem. And once you've defined the technology in that way, it's very difficult to escape that. So you celebrate over time. I've built 50 apps, I've built 100 apps, and that becomes the unit of measure. But it's very, very difficult to protect, because it's very difficult to assess the true value that you're getting through the technology, because you have a fragmented landscape of multiple applications that are built over time. And it's difficult for you as a leader to be able to play back to the business, what is the true value of that? And am I compounding that value over time? So the truths really lay out sort of six foundations, really, which starts at, are you choosing the right problem to solve? Have you taken the time to think about what it is I'm solving and whether it's already been solved somewhere else? And if I am solving it, how many times would I need to do in the future? It talks about walking past real value. My experience with a lot of organizations, that there's value leaking out of the door in the things that people really don't pay attention to. The sort of general day-to-day areas of business where people are using broken processes, data is not complete, workflows don't work, and there's a huge amount of value there. And they're great applications to start with, but you need to begin with them and then see how you move on. Shipping capabilities we talked about, and one that I sort of interrupted the process was a little bit about, if you're not able to compound value and you're not able to prove the value, you can't protect it. And what I often saw was, when you get a change of leadership within an organization, it then becomes questionable as to the value of the technology, because it's seen as tactical. And I saw over my career, I've seen over my career on many occasions um, how low-code programs have been delivering value, but have been reset because it's very difficult to actually prove the long-term value of those technologies. And you don't build the political capital, which is what you need with technology to make it and to help it prevail. So the six tools really walk through six individual sort of cases that, when you think about the trajectory, it's never about the technology. It just isn't. The low-code platforms generally do what they say on the tin. They'll deliver 7x, 8x, 10x, whatever it might be. It was never about the technology. I think the final truth says something like, it was never about the technology, it was always about you. And it's interesting how much that resonated with the audience when they really sit back and think to myself, well, have I been able to really get the most of the most out of my investment um, through the way I've organized and structured the business? One last point, and I'll just move on. But the interesting thing about the value leaking out of the business, they tended to be relatively tactical problems to solve, but they created the initial value, and that initial value in solving problems often paid for the low-code program in its own right. So by solving 20 applications in a year, you could often pay for the investment in the low-code platform. The rest of it was just sheer profit on top. So I think that's the purpose of the low-codes, and they're up on my on my LinkedIn profile. I'll not walk through them all, but that was the principle behind it. And as you say, Rob, there was quite a lot of feedback on each of the posts, and it resonated with a lot of the readers.
It was great stuff, Nick, and I'm really glad we got a chance to reconnect with you about it. A couple pitches here quickly before we turn over to Dave. One, if you don't follow Nick Ford on LinkedIn, check him out. There's a lot more detail around the six truths and a lot more great thinking that goes on. I love it when you post, Nick. So it's
Thank you.
Always something I take very seriously. And then just a quick pitch for analysis.tech and Juliask. We've got research that we have put out recently that I think mirrors yours reasonably well, Nick, which is around the host methodology. Start with the humans,
Yep.
move to objectives, strategy next, and then technology is always last, right? It's always the piece that
Yeah.
comes last. So check it out. Follow Nick Ford. Check us out on analysis.tech or juliax.com. Back to you, Dave.
Awesome. So, Nick, just on a sort of a related topic, you talk about how it isn't about the technology, but today there's so much noise around, in this AI world about, technologies like vibe coding products, that are so hot and, we would argue very misunderstood in terms of their real value, where they fit and so on. It would be really helpful to get your perspective on this. How should various roles in the organization, from deeply business centric roles to deeply technical centric roles, think about this technology? Is it a fad? And in fact, where does it really fit best? Because it can't solve every problem as
No.
much as what the marketing, might lead you to believe.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, I don't think it's a fad, for sure. I think it's here to stay. I think we need to work out where and how, what we're going to do with it, but it's certainly here to stay, in my opinion. I think it's taking over low code's old job, and we'll perhaps come back to that in a second. But the beauty of vibe coding for me is it's about flow. And that's where the vibe sort of moniker came from. It's about this ability to be able to stay in the problem space, to continue to use a single interface to build something. And there's some theater involved in it. We should never underestimate technology that brings theater to the table. People like to see things evolve in front of them. So you're typing away, and on the right-hand panel, you're seeing an application emerge. The code gets built and the application emerges. There's something magical about that, and we shouldn't underestimate it. So I think that's what's driving a lot of the hype around it. And let's face it, it's a great medium for building initial prototypes and software, and probably even building production software as we move down the line. But I think the interesting thing for me about vibe coding is that it's often about prompt to artifact. It's about building using natural language to build an outcome, which is code. Often we're developing code, we're writing code. And I think that's where it and low code ultimately have a challenge, right? Because in the modern world, I think what we want to be able to, and what would be nice to be able to do, is to a certain extent look at how we move beyond the creation of artifacts and perhaps into, how do we turn our intent into execution? I think we'll talk about that a bit later. But so for me, vibe coding very much is here to stay. I think we have to work out how we're going to use it. I think in terms of roles, if you're a software engineer, then absolutely for sure, that ability to explore, to rebuild, to build code quickly, to build libraries quickly, we see it being used all the time. It really does accelerate the development process, and many engineers have embraced it and they're using it inside existing software development frameworks. So it's absolutely adding significant value there. If you're a builder in the traditional sense of a low code builder, what we might have called citizen developers, or you're a low code expert, I think what it allows you to do is very much the same. The low code platforms are starting to put vibe coding in front of their interfaces now, and you're now able to use your platform skills and your ability to be able to understand the domain that you're in and translate that into working software. Domain experts, very much the same. We can stay in the natural language. They can stay in that for longer. They can start to use the language that they've always used to describe requirements and capture those requirements. But now all of a sudden they stay in that language for much longer. We can turn that into working software. So I think there's a lot of positive that come from it. From a leadership perspective, I think leaders need to embrace it, need to find ways in which organizations can start to adopt and to use that, and to not block it. I think that's one thing that's important. But I think for me, where vibe coding or vibing will really come of age is when it becomes part of a bigger system. I think on its own, it's fabulous at accelerating the creation, the very front end of the process of building the software. But I think for it to prevail, it's going to need to live inside a bigger system, and for that system to help in some way to control it a little bit. I think the irony for us is that perhaps low code's role now is to slow things down a little bit. If vibe coding has become so cheap and so easy, and the aperture's open so much to so many people, maybe low code's responsibility is to take some of that and wrap some control around it. It might be controlling some of the speed that we talked about many years ago. So I'm pro low code. I think we just have to find out where it's ultimately going to fit and how we to utilize it inside an enterprise environment to produce production ready software.
That's
Great
great,
stuff.
Nick. You're actually teeing up the next question. Have you seen the questions in advance by any chance?
No, not at all. Not at all. We're just so in sync, bro.
Hey, listen, the best quote we've ever gotten in Lowdown on Low Code was the first time we had you on and we asked you, is low code dead? And you said, well, ChatGPT doesn't seem to think so.
No, and it still doesn't.
But I think, and probably still shouldn't. Let's build on your last answer and move into that. Where do these worlds live together, and what is the role of low code versus vibe coding, and where do they come together as we start to think about this landscape emerging?
Yeah, we said it earlier. I think vibe coding for the minute has taken low code's old job. I think it's now accelerating the development process. It's sort of picked up where low code sort of left off there, and we're seeing it, popping up all the time. There's not a day goes by when I don't see a LinkedIn post that said I re-engineered SAP in 3 days in vibe coding. Or I'm being flippant, but it happens all the time. So I think that sheer front end of the process of just building and creating has just been commoditized and got cheap and easy to do. So, but for me, I think where it struggles is, as I said earlier, that it's still about building artifacts. It's still about building code. The output is code. And in low code, the same applies. We're applying AI and vibe modeling, shall we say, to the front of many of the low code platforms. And that's again, is a noble pursuit. I think it's the right way to go. But I think what we're finding is that we need to start to think about how we move beyond the development of the artifact itself. So if it's a screen, or if it's a data model, or if it's a piece of logic or a workflow, whatever that might be, we've got to try and break that loop, because ultimately that interrupts the flow that we talked about earlier. Vibing is about continuing in the motion, the same problem space, staying in that problem space as long as you possibly can until you can turn your intent into something that's an outcome. So you're getting something out of it. And the more you interrupt that process, the more you bring friction into that process, the more difficult it becomes. So I think the challenge we have for both vibe coding and for low coding is, how do we break some of that loop? How do we break out of the fact that we're building an artifact and we're pushing these artifacts through what is a traditional software development lifecycle process that allows us to capture requirements, we build, we test, we deploy, we get a feedback loop and we change. I think as we sort of move forward in software development, and the software development lifecycle, we need to think about how do we flatten that. And low code's done a great job over the years, right? I mean, one-click deployment, a lot of the automation, a lot of the environment is now managed by low code. And what still remains, even in the low code world, is we spend a lot of time building those front-end assets. And that's where the complexity comes. So I think for me, what's important is how do we bring that continuous flow, and how do we get out of its way? How do we not interrupt it? And that's, for me, is one of the biggest challenges that we face in adopting and using vibe coding and prompting as the sort of traditional or the new interface into software development.
Great. Thanks, Nick.
Brilliant. So I'm going to do a quick promo on analysis.tech. For those of you who have been dialing in or who don't necessarily watch us regularly, analysis.tech is a boutique analyst firm focused very specifically on the low-code application platform space and everything AI related to it as well. And we've been delivering a lot of really interesting research lately. We encourage you to actually go to analysis.tech, sign up on our website for the research, take a good look at it, give us some feedback. The only thing we need from you in order to get access to the research is just an email address. So please just go there, give us some feedback, let us know how you feel about it. Let us know of topics that you're interested in. You can get hold of us in in a number of ways, either through the website, through LinkedIn, and a number of other places as well. And that includes all the work that we continue to do around these low down and low code podcasts. Rob, we're at number approximately how much or how many right now?
I'm 90 something.
Like
I don't know. I don't
100
know.
or so, a lot.
Okay.
And so go and take a good listen to what we have out there. And I think that you'll find it interesting. We're starting to see a lot of interesting feedback to us. So Rob, back over to you.
GoAnalysis.tech. Hey,
Indeed.
Nick, you've alluded to this concept of moving from prompt to artifact to intent to execution a couple of times here, and that's great stuff. What's the future of the visual development IDE in this type of environment?
Yeah, I think this is where it gets interesting, right? Particularly for low-code platforms, we're seeing them introduce the ability to prompt to model, so they're building, that ability into their platforms. But I think if you look at the future, where intent and execution collapse and become much closer together, and probably when we talk about things like agentic, that's starting to happen in the runtime. I think what's going to need to happen. This is a bit controversial, I guess, for low-code vendors, is that um, I think the intent needs to lead and navigation needs to fall to the background. And what I mean by that is, I think there's still a role for the visual IDE, but I think it's an interrupt for me. What developers will want to do is to be able to describe requirements and intent in a language-based environment or through documents, right? It doesn't have to be typed into the environment. It can be provided through documentation or through captured business requirements, and have that turned into working software. And if we look at intent to execution, the more we can get away out of the way of that process, the better. So one of the big challenges of low-code platforms is they're all implementing software development around the SDLC. They all have their way of doing it. They all relatively proprietary in that nature. So you need to learn how the product works, how they implement the flow, where the configuration is, where the folders are, and the property inspector. There's a lot of friction in that process. And my view is that that needs to fade into the background. We need to be able to drive these platforms, and the visual environment, the models, which I think are still very, very relevant over code, become an interrupt. So you only need to use them when you want to be able to inspect something that may well have not gone right, or you want to add something to it, and it's quicker and easy to do it that way. But my own view around the visual development environment is that it needs to fall into the background and be there as that continuous interrupt, so that you can actually get into the model. And a picture paints 1,000 words, right? Rather than diving into a generator code, what better way to do it than drive into a visual model of what your intent has been translated into, and then ultimately how that intent is executed through the SDLC. So I think visual development environment is still very much a thing of the future, but I don't think they're the main control panel. It's not the way we'll build applications in the future. I think it's the interrupt that's going to be needed to ensure that we can continue this sort of flow that we talked about in previous questions.
We agree with you wholeheartedly, by the way, Nick. Yeah,
Good.
completely on the same page. Dave.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, a lot of the things you talked about, Nick, like, these fundamentals, they have to be there. And they may not be
Yes.
sexy and they may not look, visual and so on, but if you don't have them, then the stuff just breaks. And so with that in mind, at Analysis.tech, we're spending quite a lot of time researching and working through this concept of the application composition and management platform of the future. What it might look like, how it changes from what it is today. One of the concepts is this idea that agents will be this primary application experience, and a logic layer supported within in these agents, and again, agents in turn supported by enterprise level orchestration and coordination, life cycle management, and all the other good things that are necessary across a very broad range of data, structured, unstructured, and the rest. Can you talk a little bit to your view on the role of these agents, again, in the short, medium, and long term, bearing in mind that it's also a noisy space today?
Well, what it is, and I think again, if you go back to intent to execution, I think they have a huge role to play, right? But the challenge there is that the burden shifts from our traditional development environment to the runtime. Decisions will be made in real time, and that will be driven through agents. It will be driven through AI. It will be driven through automated decision making. Ultimately, if you play this out in the long term, that's where we can and hopefully should get to at some point, where these systems can make those decisions on our behalf and they can implement them autonomously. But that is a huge challenge for many of today's platforms, in my experience. I have to say that maybe some platforms are further on than I'm aware of, but we're still very much in that old world of we build, test, deploy, change, and go back through that loop. As we start to shift into a runtime aware environment, platforms need to be much more aware of what's happening there and start to push into real-time environments for managing running software. And I think that's where the challenge comes. So I think agents very much are going to play a significant role and will probably be the main orchestrator and the main interface to most of the future applications as we move forward. I think in the short term, we're already seeing agents sort of helping to manage behavior, helping decision making, some level of autonomy, but very bounded, inside a framework that we're comfortable with it operating, and we define what that looks like. And I think we're seeing some of that happen right now. Is my experience. So I think that's starting to take some shape. I think the next level of that will be, how do we get agents to start to make some of the decisions autonomously? And what does that mean for platforms? So how do we implement real-time policy? How do we ensure that we're actually operating those agents inside a framework that we're comfortable with them being able to make those decisions, and that we're able to do that without human intervention, which I think is proving difficult for many organizations at the moment. So I think that will start to happen. I think for me, the future of agents really, multi agents running completely autonomously in the real world is a long way away. Observability is critical. I think one of the things, orchestration observability, one of the things that we can do is we can observe and we can understand how decisions are made and why they were made, but we still have to go back through the old loop of taking that outcome and implementing the change. So I think observability has to come to bear, to be able to support some of that automated decision making. And then you've got the challenge of deterministic and non-deterministic systems working together, right? The thing about low-code platforms and what they're extremely good at and why they should continue to be, I think, the centerpiece in what will be this sort of architectural pattern of the future is that they're very good at that, right? Many, many years in building deterministic software, and the balance between deterministic solutions and the systems and probabilistic systems that come out of agents are going to need to merge together. I think low code is ideally suited to manage that as a runtime platform, but I think low code needs to sort of start to become the sort of intent execution engine of the future. And that means pushing outside of those boundaries, maybe foregoing some of the structure and methodology that was there before in favor of how do they implement these runtime environments and manage and control those environments. I think Gartner are talking obviously about both in terms of what the future architectural patterns might look like. I think obviously there's some merit in that. And that's bringing together multiple disparate technologies that are already working together. Some platforms already have a lot of the key components already within their tool bag. So they're very well suited to implement some of that strategy. But for me, and I don't know where this will go, I think agents will change the landscape significantly, a major role to play. But I think, the horizons for me very much like we'll have to play out the sort of agent helping us to make better decisions. We then might implement some autonomy, very heavily policy driven. And then the future is difficult to see how far out that's going to be. But I'm excited about what's happening there, as I think most people are. So yeah, we'll see how that pans out.
So Nick, at the center of this, I think is a non-trivial technical challenge around orchestration. Probably
Yes.
the after vibe coding, the most abused term that I see in the marketplace. these days. And I think as we look at sort of the evolution of the vibe coding, many of the native vibe coding vendors, I think they'll find out that this and some of these other pieces are rather difficult to do.
Yeah.
Hey, one piece I really want to hone in on, because we do here at Analysis.tech, we take a great deal of pride in doing huge and deep analytics of our listening audience. And it turns out we've got a huge following of the rowing community. Turns out it's right after low code. It's our number one listener
Oh,
group.
interest.
Do you have do you have any advice around automation for the rowing community, Nick?
Well, it's funny you should say that, because that's an area in which me and my son are very keen on. My young son, who's 16 now, is building his own rowing solution and building it in low-code technology. He's employing a lot of new technologies inside there. So I think from a rowing perspective, rowing is about coordination. It's about coordinating multiple different systems, from booking boats to booking people to the many constraints that come around that. I think one interesting area really in the rowing side, which we're exploring, is the use of some of the sort of visual recognition technologies and AI in terms of managing the ability of athletes. And I think, in terms of automation on a sort of real subject, that's becoming very interesting part, because like any other sport, rowing's highly technical, and the repetition that's needed is important to becoming, I suppose, a highly tuned athlete that way. So we're exploring things like how do we bring video analysis in, how do we manage that through automation, how do we extract frames from that and start to understand what those frames are doing, and AI plays a great role in that. So I think the interesting thing about automation and AI is it's touching everything, right? And I think for me, there's a huge opportunity for us to leverage that in a really positive way. And I only hope that everybody starts to do that, and we start to use these technologies to really drive things like rowing, but other sports and environments in a positive manner. I think that's important for me.
So, Nick, I started off that question a little bit tongue in cheek, but I want to kind of close it out with actually a really serious comment. So, thing number one, you started off with saying nothing around the six truths. There's nothing new here. I'll point back to Malcolm Ross, then of Appian, who, when he came on the show and we said, "What was your background?" And Malcolm said, when he was a teenager, he was building Lotus Notes applications to automate a whole bunch of functions for swim teams and swim clubs, right? So, thing number one, nothing is new. But thing number two, and I think which is more important, is you and your son, you're solving a problem here, right? You're solving a problem that is problematic. You're using low code. You're doing it quickly. You're doing it without a lot of resources. There are thousands of these in every enterprise, right? And until such time as you automate them, you're really not going to get towards any sort of real transformation. So that is actually, actually a really critical element. Nick, thank you so much for joining us today. Always a pleasure. Dave, thanks for co-hosting. Folks, Nick Ford, follow him on LinkedIn. Great stuff, even if you're not a rower. And check us out on analysis.tech. Hit the like button, hit the follow button. Help us get the word out to like-minded folks. Thanks, everybody.
Well, my pleasure.
Thanks, guys.